yes.
You had mentioned on the panel about how like the showrunner for 24 hated clarinets.
Yes, he did.
How often does something like that happen where you have to like completely like rethink how you're gonna write something?
You know, what's great about it is you really, in the end, you really appreciate that kind of clarity. You know, when someone says, "I really don't like this of any kind," that's as good as telling them they love something in a way. I mean, it's not as good, but when someone is really clear about something they're not connecting with, then you know that you can retire that as a sound or a direction. But I'd known him a little bit by that time, and and by the way, to add to that story, I'd played back a couple of things, and I'd already recorded the score, and we were playing back the first 2 or 3 cues. He goes, "What does that sound like?" It's the clarinet. I lose that sound. I hate that sound. I said, okay, so I'll never use the clarinet again. Well, I had 3 more cues to play that to use the clarinet. So, and I thought, well, do I tell him that another clarinet sound is coming? So I'm sitting in front of him. I hit play. Listen to you. He goes, "There's that sound again." It was like, I said, "What am I going to do?" You know, he says, "I'll lose it." You know, so
It's like I can't take it out right now.
yeah, there was. I remember when I did the main title to Elementary, and the great Rob Doherty, who was the writer of that show, the creator of that show. I had a kind of a Moog synthesizer, sort of doing an ostinato kind of phrase, everyone, the best showrunners that give notes are sometimes people who aren't musicians, because all they do is they just tell you what they just don't like or that they want to feel. And he says, "There's something in there that's kind of noodling around that I'm not sure I'm connecting with," and so I identified it and I took it out, and that was that. You know, so when they're very clear, that makes your job easier. The worst is when people say, "I don't know, it's not doing it." I'm like, "Well, what's not doing it?" And then you're like, "Well, how do you work with that?"
Helpful, thank you.
Yeah, that was very helpful.
Just curious, how did the pandemic affect your creative process, and are there any habits you developed over the last 2.5 years that you're going to carry on moving forward?
Yeah, I think there's one habit that's here to stay. You know what a spotting session is? A spotting session is when you sit down in a group and look at the picture together, and you decide where the music's going to play. You decide the moments in the show where the music's going to be, serving the story, and you say, "Well, I'll have music from here to here. I don't think we need music here." And a lot of times they put in a temp score to get the conversation started. That was almost always exclusively done, in person. And you'd have to drive across town, or drive where you're going to go and get clearance to get on the studio lot. Then you go sit in these uncomfortable couches, and then you go. Well, now we're doing that on Zoom, and what happens is everyone can be anywhere, and they're looking at the same video, and we're all commenting at the same time. And I think that practice is here to stay, because it saves us a tremendous amount of time in terms of travel. We can also communicate, as you know how you're on Zoom, sometimes you'll talk to someone while you're Zooming. So if I have an editor and I want to tell him, "Hey, could you make sure that we put a note in the notes that I want to make sure this character gets a certain amount of treatment. I have an idea." Instead of me stopping the meeting to whisper that to him, I can actually be typing that while we're still addressing anything that the director has. So the composer's life before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID has sort of been unchanged. We spend a lot of time alone. The one thing that was really profoundly different is when I left the studio, I was pretty much still alone, and that was different for everybody. So we had a lot of isolation in our job. But then one thing that was really foreign to me was the isolation when you're not in the studio. So that did have an effect on me from the point of view of my family. I'm married, and one of my wife's parents passed away, so she had to go be with them for a while. So for a good 2-3 months, I was living alone and working alone. So it was. I'm glad that part of life is fading away. I hope.
So you talked on the panel about for Halo you focused on the idea of reaching, and then for Jessica Jones it was the cat. Is that how you mostly approach a project? You just focus on a particular theme and then
Yeah, sometimes there's a word that, I mean, more often than not, I realize that there's a word that sometimes becomes sort of my unit of intention, you know? In the case of Jack Bauer, for example, when I was talking with the executive producer about that, the one who hated the clarinet, you know, he described him as a hero. He definitely was a hero, but he also had, he was a little bit, he could be rogue, you know, he could be kind of a maverick and kind of do things off book. So rogue, hero that doesn't play exactly by the rules but has a good moral center. But the word hero kind of, and strong, you know, these kinds of little, and so sometimes I just try to, like if I can take a pill with that word, I just sort of try to let it marinate and then see what happens. You know, sometimes things come out in that way, and in the case of Jessica and Halo, that process serves me well in terms of finding the theme. Because it becomes specific, you know. I think the thing we love about the best themes we've ever heard, first of all, they're catchy, but there's a specificity to them, you know, something that really, like even, you know, the wah, 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 you know, that didn't exist before at one point, and then it comes out, and now whenever you sing it, oh, it's a Western, you know, it's a Mr. Morricone, and so it helps me to be specific in my writing.
How do you maintain that specificity with something as well known, and I think you've used the word previously, sacred, as the Halo themes?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the thing that's interesting about Halo is there has to be an authenticity to what you're doing. You have to be connected to what you're doing. And if I'm not connected to the story, or if I don't feel quite connected to the arc of what I'm trying to tell with the story, it won't work. You know, if I reused a pre-existing Halo theme on something that I wasn't quite connected with in terms of the story, I don't think it works. And I think even any fan with no musical experience whatsoever, they'll start to fade from the connection to the show as well. I believe a good composer, I mean, I think everyone in this room is doing this, I think they bake into the music that kind of connection that they have to what they're doing, and the more connected you are to something, the more specific. I do believe you bring a specificity to your approach. So whenever if I use the Halo theme or my theme, John's theme, you know, we pick those moments so that when they arrive, it feels earned. It feels earned, and it feels if something arrives a little early or it feels too late or too labored, you're checking your email, your channel surfing. Those are generally signs that something's off. You know. I know. I hope I don't sound like an idiot as I'm saying this. I'm trying to. It's a tough question what you're asking, but I worked for Mark Snow, who did the X-Files. He was my mentor, and he was always about be specific with your choices. Because if you can really be specific with your choices, people can work with that. And if you're not specific, people will have trouble telling you what they want. So when a guy says, "I hate that clarinet," well, that's pretty clear, because I made a very specific choice for the clarinet, and then he doesn't like it. So now it comes out, and we put something else and find another way.
What choices did you make for conveying the otherness and the religious aspects of the Covenant?
Well, the first time I ever saw the interior of that ship, you know, was when Maquis. Did you see the series? Did you see? Yeah, and there was the things that were immediately evident are when I just saw the way it was filmed and the way it was lit. It had a very sacred kind of space feel to it. Sometimes I'm also informed visually when it's darkly lit or if there's candlelight or something of that nature. This is a case where, and the voice of I forgot I'm missing his name, but you know, his beautiful voice, and he was the same voice as the king, I think. There was just something very almost priest-like about him, or holy manish, if you will. And I heard low choir with in my head, combined with a thematic idea that was not going to be too melodious because the environment was so rich, and I just wanted it to be a part of this beautiful chamber. And then I had the idea of redesigning spiritual bells and things, ceremonial instruments that would be in spaces like that. And then when it was finally mixed with all the reverb, with the talking in the chamber and the backgrounds that had more of a colder, more feel to it, it all works together. And again, it comes back to making it your own. You just can't drop in any old sets of sounds or sonorities without really connecting to the energy of these characters and what their intentions are. So that was the hope. And I really love those scenes because there weren't that many of them. And when we were back there, I would reprise some of those energies, which helped sort of define the color, the mosaic of the entire series.
Do you have a particular type of score that you prefer to compose? Like, do you prefer action, or do you prefer something more like Jessica Jones was noir-y?
Yeah, I mean, I played a lot of jazz in college, so when Jessica Jones came along, I was so thrilled to have that opportunity to go back to that style of playing for me. I mean, I played almost on all of it, on every part of it. The action, you sort of fall in love with what you're dealing with. You fall in love over and over again with the project you're on. So I mean, sometimes I did get COVID halfway through Halo on episode 5, and it was the shortest episode, but it was the most action-oriented. And I will admit I was a bit overwhelmed at that because I'm like, well, how am I going to get this done? Because I feel crappy. But we find a way, and we like being able to explore that. I'm working on a Western now set in the 1800s. So that's a whole other genre of musical execution. And then I guess to answer your question, when I was working on Homeland, which was a show on Showtime, that was a very minimal score, which taught me the value of how sometimes you can do very minimal ideas and have a profound effect on story and score. And now there are so many action adventure stories out there. We're always trying to find new ways to be interesting and creative. So I don't have a niche favorite, but I will say that the Jessica Jones stood out because you don't normally get those shows, and I doubt I will ever again. Once they do a Jessica Jones 2, which would be kind of nice.
Never know.
Never know. I hope so. Kristen Ritter was so great in that. Everyone was so great in that show. It was a really fun show.
For preparation for Halo, especially in conveying the militaristic sound,
Yes.
Were there any particular works or inspirations that drew you to where you ended up?
The one thing I was mindful of is the Halo game had a rich orchestral score. And I knew that I wanted to have an orchestral score in there. And with regards to the military part, it's interesting because I had to learn about Spartans. Spartans have the strength of 30 people. That's what if my memory's correct. They were almost like, it was like having a group of 30 soldiers. One Spartan is as powerful as that, which I thought, well, that's interesting. So when I was thinking of military, and I was thinking, well, how can you enhance, what would be the modern or the brutish, larger soldier? He's still a soldier, but they are not human soldiers. Well, they're humans, but they have different. I don't even know how to. I don't want to get into trouble about how to describe it. But the point is there was something to them that was super. It was extra, and so sometimes that came in the form of designing drums with a little bit of a hint of the military flares, but they would have much more weight and import. John's theme, there was also a theme kind of for the Spartans, which didn't get played very much, but it was pretty strong. So these things winked at some more, I don't want to use traditional as a bad word, they would wink sometimes at things that you've heard in other action things that have military textures, but I also just love what John Williams did with certain big action scenes that involved the military, because he was so thematic writing was so great, and we wanted to keep themes always through the show. So a lot of the show, regardless of its intensity or its violence, you'll find a lot of themes hanging around there. So it's a very long-winded answer, but I hope I got somewhere near something.
Thank you very much.